In the sleepy town of Windmere Hollow, where time seemed to slow down and neighbors still waved from porches, lived a couple who many admired. Eleanor and Jordan Whitaker had built a life many aspired to, a charming cedarwood house on the edge of town, two spirited children, and careers that fulfilled them. Eleanor, 37, taught music at the local middle school. Her gentle nature made her beloved among students and parents alike. Jordan, 39, was a landscape designer with a flair for transforming forgotten spaces into blooming sanctuaries. They had been together for 13 years, and their connection felt, at least from the outside, unshakable. Mornings in the Whitaker home were ritualistic and warm. The sound of the kettle's soft whistle, the thump of tiny feet racing down the hallway, and the melody of Eleanor humming as she packed lunches created a peaceful rhythm. Jordan, ever meticulous, would stand in front of the hallway mirror, adjusting his olive green utility jacket. He looked dignified, with flecks of gray dusting his temples, a quiet sign of age that only enhanced his thoughtful expression. But lately, Eleanor noticed something was off. Jordan's smiles didn't reach his eyes anymore. The way he sipped his coffee was hurried, distracted. He'd begun leaving earlier than usual, citing last-minute site visits or client emergencies. When she asked how things were going, he offered vague replies and brushed off deeper questions with forced laughter or sudden subject changes. "Another early day?" she asked one Tuesday morning, watching him fumble with his keys. Jordan glanced over his shoulder, forced a tight smile, and replied, "Yeah, big project upstate. I'll probably be back late." He leaned in to kiss her forehead, something he used to do with tenderness, but now felt like a routine checkmark. Eleanor stood in the doorway a moment longer than usual, staring after him as his truck disappeared down the gravel driveway. That day, a strange restlessness tugged at her chest. She pushed through it, teaching scales and harmonies to eager sixth graders, but her thoughts returned to Jordan again and again. When she came home, she noticed his jacket slung over the armrest of the living room chair, something out of character for the neat and precise man she knew. On instinct, she reached for it to hang it up but felt a crinkle in one of the pockets. She hesitated. Her fingers curled around a folded paper. A receipt. Her heart began to drum louder. It was from a convenience store in a neighborhood they never frequented, at an odd hour, late at night. Behind it were two more receipts, one for a low-budget diner, and another for fuel, both dated on days when Jordan claimed to be working at a remote garden site for a high-end client. What confused her most were the stains on the sleeves of his jacket, dark smudges that looked like engine grease or oil. Unusual for someone who spent his workdays sketching blueprints and supervising flower bed placements. That evening, Eleanor tried to act normal. As they sat at the dinner table, their two children chatting about school, she watched Jordan closely. His responses were absent, his laughs misplaced, his eyes distant. He seemed like he was somewhere else entirely. In bed that night, when the house had gone quiet, Eleanor lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The rhythm of Jordan's breathing beside her offered no comfort. For the first time in years, she felt like she was lying next to a stranger. Days passed. Her unease grew like ivy around her ribs. She began noticing more, his sudden urgency to take phone calls in private, the way he guarded his phone as if it held dangerous secrets, the way he seemed to flinch when the kids asked simple questions about his day. One Saturday morning, after he claimed to have an emergency meeting at one of his construction sites, Eleanor stood frozen at the door as he left. The tight knot in her stomach refused to unravel. Something wasn't right. Something had shifted in the man she thought she knew better than anyone. Instead of diving into her weekend chores, she grabbed her keys and quietly slid into her car. She kept her distance as she followed Jordan's pickup truck out of their quiet neighborhood, through winding town roads, and finally into a part of Windmere Hollow she rarely visited. The buildings here were older, the paint chipped and signs faded. It was a neighborhood on the edge of the city where time had been less kind. Jordan's truck finally turned into a gravel lot beside a rundown auto garage. Eleanor parked down the street, heart pounding. She watched through her windshield, expecting him to meet someone or perhaps inspect a landscaping job. Instead, she saw Jordan step out of the truck wearing not his usual work clothes, but an oil-stained jumpsuit. He grabbed a rag from the back seat and walked casually toward the garage where two other men stood chatting. They greeted him with familiarity. Moments later, he rolled up his sleeves and began helping lift a car hood. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. This wasn't some side project. This wasn't an emergency consult. Her husband, Jordan Whitaker, the man who once gave lectures at local gardening expos, was working at an auto repair shop. She sat frozen, unsure whether to cry or scream. Her mind reeled. The images she'd conjured of affairs or secret lives were suddenly replaced with something much more confusing. Why had he lied? What had happened to his landscape firm? Why hadn't he told her? At that moment, realization didn't bring relief. It brought more questions. The truth wasn't what she feared, it was more complex, more painful. And it was only beginning to surface. She opened her door and stepped out into the warm morning air, her legs shaking, her hands clenched. It was time for answers. Eleanor stood at the edge of the auto garage parking lot, her heart pounding like a war drum inside her chest. The muffled sounds of conversation, tools clanking, and the hiss of a pneumatic hose echoed in the air, yet everything around her felt silent. Time seemed suspended as she watched her husband laugh, genuinely laugh, with the other mechanics. His face, usually drawn and anxious at home, looked relaxed here under the oil-stained awning of the garage. She took a few cautious steps forward, gravel crunching under her shoes. As if sensing her presence, Jordan turned. His smile faltered the second their eyes met. A wrench slipped from his hand and clattered to the floor. The men beside him turned curiously, but Jordan raised a shaky hand and said, "Just a second, guys." He wiped his hands on a rag, looking as though he'd been punched in the stomach. Eleanor stood still, arms crossed tightly across her chest, her emotions battling inside her, confusion, betrayal, fear, but most of all, an aching need for truth. He approached slowly, grease on his fingers and a trembling in his voice. I didn't expect." "No," she interrupted, her voice quiet but sharp. "You didn't expect to get caught." He flinched, pain flashing in his eyes. "It's not what you think." "Then what is it, Jordan?" she asked, tears threatening but not yet falling. "Because I've been losing sleep imagining 100 scenarios, and I don't think any of them involved you. Fixing radiators." Jordan glanced around and gently guided her to the side of the building, away from the curious eyes of the garage crew. They stood under the shadow of a rusted staircase, the scent of oil and burning rubber heavy in the air. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, with a heavy sigh, Jordan began. "I lost the firm 3 months ago," he said, voice low. "My last big client backed out on a project. The investors pulled funding. Everything collapsed overnight. I didn't want to tell you, not like that, not when I still thought I could fix it." Eleanor's breath hitched. "You lost everything? Why didn't you come to me?" "I couldn't," he whispered. "I felt like I'd failed you. Failed the kids. Everything we built. Gone. I thought maybe I could find something else quickly, something in my field. But it never came. I applied, called contacts, even considered leaving town for a while. Nothing worked." "And the garage?" she asked. "A friend owed me a favor," he said, glancing down at his stained boots. "It's the only work I could find that paid anything decent, and it came with cash under the table. I took it out of desperation. And then the lies just kept piling up. I'd tell myself I'd explain everything tomorrow. But tomorrow never felt like the right time." Eleanor's mind reeled. So all the stress, the late nights. It wasn't another woman. It was this. Jordan nodded. "It was this. I was afraid you'd think less of me. That you'd look at me like a stranger." She studied him, his slumped shoulders, oil-streaked face, eyes pleading for understanding. The man in front of her wasn't the one she remembered from those garden tours or elegant community events. But he was still her husband. And more than that, he was human. Her anger softened slightly, replaced by a deep ache in her chest. "You lied to me," she said, tears brimming. "But what hurts more is that you didn't trust me enough to tell me when everything started to fall apart." "I know," he murmured, stepping closer. "And I hate myself for it every day. I should have believed we could weather this together. Instead, I tried to protect you by shutting you out. They stood there for what felt like ages, the sun climbing higher, warming the cracked concrete beneath their feet. Finally, Eleanor reached out and touched his hand, rougher than she remembered, with fresh calluses that spoke of hard labor. "I don't care about the money, Jordan. I never did," she whispered. "But I care about us. About truth. I can't rebuild what I don't know is broken." His voice broke. "I don't want to lose you." "Then stop running," she said. "We deal with this together. No more secrets." Jordan nodded, his eyes shining. No more secrets. They left the garage together, his truck parked beside hers now. The drive home was quiet but filled with something new, raw honesty. Eleanor stared out the window, processing everything. She didn't feel relief, exactly, but the suffocating weight of confusion was gone. That night, after putting the kids to bed, they sat across from each other at the dining room table. Jordan told her everything, every unpaid bill, every rejection email, every night he cried in the truck before walking through the door pretending everything was fine. Eleanor cried too. She told him how alone she'd felt, how her mind had turned against her, whispering all the worst things. The pain between them unraveled like tangled thread, each word cutting but necessary. And in the center of the mess, they found something beautiful, truth. "I've missed you," Eleanor said softly. "I've missed you too," Jordan replied, his voice hoarse. She reached across the table, took his hands in hers, and squeezed gently. "Let's find a way forward. Together." For the first time in months, they went to bed with no unspoken truths lingering between them. Just exhaustion, vulnerability, and the faint hope that healing had begun. The days that followed Jordan's confession unfolded like waking from a long, uncertain dream. The air in the Whitaker household felt different, not lighter, but clearer. With the truth out in the open, Eleanor and Jordan no longer danced around awkward silences or half-truths. But the road ahead was far from smooth. They spent the next weekend going over their finances at the kitchen table. Bills were stacked in uneven piles, some unopened, some marked final notice in bold red ink. The weight of them pressed heavily on the couple, their bright wooden kitchen suddenly feeling smaller, colder. Eleanor took a deep breath. "We're behind on the mortgage, 2 utility bills, and the car payment. If something doesn't change soon." Jordan rubbed his temple. "I'll keep working at the garage. Maybe I can ask for more hours. I've already put in a request to cover some extra classes and weekend rehearsals," Eleanor offered. "It's not much, but it's something." He reached for her hand across the table, and their fingers locked. It was a simple gesture, but in that moment, it meant everything. Despite the challenges, there was a strange comfort in honesty. Jordan began involving Eleanor in small decisions again, whether to sell some unused tools, which expenses to cut, even how to ask for help from friends and family, something neither of them had ever considered before. Pride had always been their quiet companion, but now it stepped aside for something more enduring, partnership. Each morning, Jordan still left early, but no longer with a fake smile. He kissed Eleanor softly, his hand still rough from turning wrenches, and she would smile back, even if it trembled. The children were aware something had changed. 8-year-old Amelia asked why Daddy's clothes smelled like oil now instead of flowers. "We're just making some changes," Eleanor told her gently. "But it's nothing you need to worry about." In truth, the kids adjusted faster than their parents. They found novelty in Dad's new garage stories, how he helped bring a rusty old Chevy back to life, or how he fixed a flat tire in under 5 minutes. To them, he was still Superman, just in a different costume. One Saturday, Eleanor stopped by the garage during Jordan's lunch break, bringing a sandwich and a thermos of homemade tea. She sat on the bench near the back door as he peeled off his gloves, his forehead streaked with grime. "Thanks," he said, smiling tiredly. "This is the best part of my day." They sat there eating in silence, watching a mechanic tinker with an old Mustang. Eleanor turned to him after a while. "Do you still want to go back to design work?" Jordan stared into the distance. "Yeah. Every day. But I'm scared. What if no one wants me anymore? What if I'm just this now?" "You're not just anything," she replied, placing a hand on his knee. "You're more than your title. You always were." That conversation sparked something. Jordan started applying again, not just to large firms like before, but to smaller, local businesses, startups, consultancies, even teaching workshops at the community center. Eleanor helped him rewrite his resume, highlighting not just his experience, but his resilience, too. At night, while the kids slept, they planned their week like a tactical mission. Eleanor's schedule was now packed with extra classes, leaving her tired but determined. Jordan returned from the garage sore and often emotionally drained, but they found joy in little things, a shared cup of tea before bed, watching old movies with the kids, or simply holding hands under the blankets, whispering their hopes into the dark. One evening, Jordan found Eleanor asleep on the couch, lesson plans scattered on the coffee table. He pulled a blanket over her and sat beside her, just watching. The weight of the last few months pressed on him, shame, regret, fear, but in that moment, he also felt something else, gratitude. She had every reason to leave, to be furious. But she chose to stay. To fight with him, not against him. He leaned down, kissed her forehead, and whispered, "I'm going to make it right." The next morning, Jordan received a call from a former colleague, someone who had moved to a nearby town to start a boutique landscaping consultancy. They had a small team and were looking for someone experienced who could not only design but also help mentor younger workers. It wasn't a flashy role or high paying, but it was in his field. It was something real. When he told Eleanor about the opportunity, her eyes lit up. "You should go for it. You've earned this." He hesitated. "But it might mean moving. A smaller town. New schools for the kids." "We'll adjust," she said without hesitation. "We always do." He applied that afternoon. In the week that followed, tension simmered as they waited. Every time the phone rang, Jordan jumped. Finally, one crisp Thursday morning, the call came. He had an interview. He left early, wearing a cleaned-up version of his old work attire, khakis, button-up shirt, and the blazer he hadn't worn in months. Eleanor helped straighten the collar, stepping back to admire him. "You look like someone ready to begin again," she said. He smiled. "I'm still nervous." "Good," she said, brushing a fleck of dust off his shoulder. "It means you care." He kissed her, deeper this time. "Thank you, Elle, for not giving up on me." As he drove off, Eleanor watched his truck disappear around the bend, just like she had weeks ago. But this time, her chest didn't fill with dread. It filled with hope. The morning after Jordan's interview, the house felt different. The kids were louder, the coffee tasted richer, and Eleanor caught herself smiling for no reason. Even without knowing the outcome yet, hope had quietly returned to their lives like the first signs of spring after a brutal winter. That afternoon, Jordan returned with a look on his face Eleanor hadn't seen in months: relief, joy, a sparkle in his eye that had been buried under months of fear and exhaustion. "I got it," he said, almost in disbelief. Eleanor, standing barefoot in the kitchen, dropped the dish towel she was holding. "You got the job?" He nodded, breathless. "They want me to start next month. It's part-time to begin with, but they're excited about my experience. And they're letting me help redesign the new community park project." She ran to him, arms thrown around his neck, laughing through tears. "Jordan, that's amazing." They clung to each other like survivors of a storm finally seeing sunlight. The kids, hearing the commotion, came running. When Jordan told them he was going to be working with plants and parks again, Amelia squealed and asked if she could come visit the park when it was done. The next few weeks became a whirlwind of preparation and transition. Jordan worked his last shifts at the garage, sharing heartfelt goodbyes with co-workers who, in their own quiet ways, had become a second family. Though greasy and rough-edged, they'd offered him dignity during the hardest part of his life. Meanwhile, Eleanor adjusted her school schedule, scaling back on extra hours so she could help with the kids as they prepared for the move to their new, smaller town an hour north. It wasn't easy. Packing up a life, even a modest one, brought tears and memories. Eleanor found drawings the kids had made years ago, old garden sketches Jordan had tucked into a box, even a note she had written him back when they were newlyweds, folded and faded, but still full of love. Their new home was smaller, older, but nestled near the town's community garden and only a few blocks from the elementary school. It had quirks, creaky floorboards, a leaky faucet, but it also had charm. Most importantly, it gave them a chance to start fresh, without the shadows of secrets lingering in every room. Jordan's new job wasn't glamorous. His workspace was a converted shed behind the main office, and he shared it with a 20-year-old intern named Caleb who listened to loud indie music and asked too many questions. But Jordan didn't mind. For the first time in a long time, he felt useful in the way that mattered most. His hands, once stiff from the wrench and oil, found comfort again in sketching lines and imagining beauty. He came home with dirt under his fingernails, not from desperation, but from creation. He talked at dinner again, really talked, sharing stories of a stubborn tulip bed or proposal to use native wildflowers to attract pollinators. The kids listened intently. Eleanor listened even harder. They all began to heal. But healing wasn't linear. There were nights when Jordan sat silently on the porch, staring into the dark with furrowed brows. Eleanor would join him, no words necessary, just a blanket over their laps and a hand to hold. There were mornings when Eleanor woke up anxious about bills, or about how close they had come to losing each other. Sometimes they argued, not like before, with sarcasm or silence, but with honesty. About money. About time. About dreams they had postponed or redefined. One night, Eleanor, curled up on the couch with a glass of wine, asked, "Do you think we'll ever have what we used to?" Jordan, sitting across from her, shook his head gently. "No. But I think we'll have something better." "How so?" "Because now we know who we are when everything falls apart," he said. "And we're still here." Eleanor let that sink in. She realized he was right. Before, their love had been wrapped in routine, in comfort and stability. Now, it was rooted deeper, in truth, in pain endured, in the willingness to grow even in hard soil. As the weeks became months, they found new traditions. Friday evenings became picnic nights, where they'd spread a blanket in the backyard, even if it was just takeout sandwiches and store-bought cookies. They played board games again. The kids built a fort in the living room that stayed up for an entire week. They weren't just surviving anymore, they were living. Jordan taught Caleb how to build a garden trellis from scratch, and when Caleb's design got approved for the community park, Jordan beamed like a proud older brother. Eleanor started writing music again, soft lullabies on her old keyboard that she hadn't touched in years. One even made it into the school's spring concert. Their love transformed, not into the heady, whirlwind romance it had once been, but into something quieter, sturdier. Like a tree withered by storm, scarred, but stronger. On the 6-month anniversary of their move, they sat in their modest backyard, watching the kids chase fireflies as dusk settled. Eleanor leaned into Jordan's shoulder. "You know what I'm grateful for?" she whispered. "What?" "That you failed." He laughed softly. "That's one way to put it." "I mean it," she said, turning to look at him. "Because through that failure, we found out who we really are. And I love that person, both of them." He kissed her gently. "I love that person too." And under the soft canopy of stars, with nothing fancy, nothing perfect, just them, they knew they had rebuilt something more valuable than a career or a house. They had rebuilt trust. A gentle summer breeze moved through the small backyard of the Whitakers' new home, rustling the overgrown grass and carrying the laughter of their children as they ran barefoot across the lawn. Fireflies flickered like tiny lanterns in the fading light. Jordan sat in a creaky lawn chair, his arms draped casually over the sides, while Eleanor leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder. They weren't speaking, not with words anyway. Their silence was a warm one, comfortable, peaceful, earned. It had been 6 months since Jordan took the new job, and already, it felt like a lifetime ago that they'd sat in their old kitchen, surrounded by overdue bills and heavier silences. The job had turned out better than either of them expected. The team was small, yes, but Jordan had found purpose again, designing public spaces that welcomed everyone, not just the wealthy clients he used to court. He was invited to co-lead a project for a children's sensory garden in the center of town, something that made his voice light up when he talked about it. Eleanor had settled into the local school with grace. Her love for music had reignited. She started an after-school music circle, which quickly became a favorite for both students and parents. Some nights she even played soft melodies on the piano while Jordan sketched designs at the dining table, an unspoken harmony between them that words could never capture. Yet it wasn't the professional success or the quiet stability that made them feel whole again. It was the understanding that they had weathered the worst and still reached for each other. One evening, Jordan came home holding a small check in his hands, his first bonus from the new job. It wasn't much, not compared to what he used to earn, but it meant something different now. He handed it to Eleanor with a quiet smile. "What should we do with it?" he asked. She looked at the amount, then at him. "Save half. Use the rest to do something fun. Together." He nodded. "Ice cream and the museum with the kids this weekend?" "Perfect," she said. That was the difference now. Before, they might have spent a bonus like that on a new appliance, a night at a fancy restaurant, or even just letting it vanish into their monthly spending. Now, every choice was intentional. Every dollar had a name, and every plan was something they decided together. They had become a team again. Some evenings, they'd revisit their old life in conversation, softly, like touching a bruise to see if it still hurt. "Do you ever miss it?" Eleanor asked one night, lying beside Jordan under the stars. "The big house? The fancy clients? The business lunches?" She nodded. He shrugged. "Sometimes. But I don't miss who I was." She turned toward him. "Who were you?" "A man who thought he had to hold everything up by himself," he said, voice low. "Who thought that being strong meant staying silent, pretending he had it all under control. But now I know better. Strength isn't silence. It's showing up, messy, scared, tired, and still trying." She reached for his hand and laced her fingers through his. "You're stronger now than you've ever been." He smiled. "So are you." There was no need to say more. Their children didn't fully understand what their parents had gone through, not yet. But they knew that their home was safe, that their parents smiled more now, hugged more now. That their father read them bedtime stories again, and their mother sang lullabies while folding laundry. Sometimes, those simple things are the greatest gifts. On a cool autumn day, Jordan was invited to speak at a town event honoring local contributors. Standing on the makeshift stage with nothing but a microphone and a wooden backdrop, he looked out at the modest crowd, teachers, gardeners, shopkeepers, kids sitting cross-legged in the grass. Eleanor and the kids stood in the front row. He spoke plainly, from the heart. "I used to think success was about status," he said. "Titles. Income. Recognition. But life has a funny way of showing you what really matters. I lost my job, my business, and nearly lost my family. All because I was afraid to be vulnerable. Afraid to admit I needed help. But through that failure, I found something more valuable than any title: resilience, partnership, and the understanding that real strength comes from honesty and love. I'm not here because I bounced back alone. I'm here because my wife stood beside me, even when she had every reason not to. And together, we rebuilt something stronger than we had before." Eleanor blinked away tears as the crowd clapped. Jordan stepped off the stage, humble and proud, and walked straight into her arms. That night, they sat in the backyard once again, under a full moon. The house behind them was small, the porch light flickering slightly. But it was home. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I had told you the truth from the beginning?" he asked quietly. She smiled. "We can't rewrite the past. But we can write everything from here on out, together." And they did. They continued to grow, not just financially, but emotionally. They found joy in imperfection, comfort in vulnerability, and strength in each other's presence. They taught their children that it's okay to fall, as long as you rise again, together. The wealth they now had couldn't be measured in bank accounts or square footage. It lived in their home's laughter-filled rooms. In the quiet strength of their evening talks. In every scar they wore with pride, not as wounds, but as proof they'd healed. And that, they both knew, was the kind of richness no one could ever take away.